Hi, I'd like to talk a little bit about facilitative feedback. We'll be working with facilitative feedback this week. The definition of facilitative feedback is feedback that's oriented toward revision. And I feel like as a teacher, I am always um, using facilitative feedback, even when I am providing a score for a paper, because I don't know, there's just feels like writing never ends. And if you hate writing, too bad for you, I guess. That you can always revise. And in my classes, there's always an opportunity to do it again, try it again, try it again if you want to. And I see the opportunity to revise as an opportunity to continue to learn, to do what the assignment is asking you to do. So we are going to start developing some skills in responding to writing. And we're going to do that initially with the shorter assignment, and then we'll move into, toward the end of the term, a longer paper. And so we're going to start practicing our facilitative feedback skills, um, working on the discussion board with one another's shorter work. So um, I'll just say that I really, really like responding to student writing. It is the hardest part of my job. It is the one that is the most time consuming, and yet it is the one that's most gratifying because when I get written material from students, I can see what you're thinking, I can see what your skill levels are, and I can individualize my instructional practice based on that data. So responding to student writing is very much a part of the teaching that I do, and I hope that you'll be able to use it in this class to improve your writing skills. Because responding to drafts takes me on average like 20 minutes per draft, some drafts it takes me longer. Once I start grading, drafts take over my life. So if you're headed into teaching secondary English, just know that you need lots of time to be able to focus on written assignments, which means that having fewer students in your classroom is really important. So nationally, the recommendation for a writing intensive class is 20 students. Many classrooms and many school districts and many universities don't have the capacity to reduce the class size down to 20. But that's best because then at least you have enough time, hopefully, to do some good drafting and to really have everybody roll their sleeves up and get involved in revising. So I think too, responding is kind of intimate. Like these are your ideas headed to me or to the reader, right? And it's really amazingly delightful to be that intimate with ideas with students. As Brinkley talks about, it has to do with authenticity. If the student is writing something meaningful, they have something to say, and they're taking a risk in communicating it, and that because they're emotionally invested, they communicate themselves, right? Their identity as human beings. And I think it's really important as a responder to recognize that, right? That I recognize the gift you are giving me, and I want the interaction between the writer and reader to be emotionally rewarding. So that's kind of why we want good peer feedback, so that you feel you've been heard. Okay, and just saying good job is not indicating. It's nice, and I think we should do lots of it, but it's not enough to indicate you've been heard. So the kind of feedback we'll be working on will be feedback oriented toward revising and toward writing as a process, right? Where the student has started somewhere and is generating some ideas, and we'll be trying to think, what are some things we could recommend for next steps for the student? And so that's the goal with facilitative feedback. Okay, it treats writing as a process, and it inserts the reader into the process to help the writer figure out where to go next. Okay, so one thing to know is that students can't process, writers actually can't process too much feedback at once. So usually what I focus on first is global issues, that the issues that affect the ideas and the structure of the whole draft. So that might be the argument, the thesis, the topic sentence, the organization. Uh, does the draft have single topic paragraphs? Is there a logical order? Are there transitions that help me figure out how these points relate to one another? And how is the idea developed using evidence and analysis of evidence in connection with the thesis? So global comments have to do with the big picture. And in order to make them really effective, I recommend reading the draft once through before making any comments, because it's hard to see the big picture if you're trying to comment on every sentence. And so in order to help students absorb the comments they're receiving, there are some tricks to doing it. One, I would say avoid the good, bad kind of evaluation. That's not your job. You don't have to say this is good, this is bad. By whose standards? Um, One thing you can do is describe objectively what you're seeing, right? Is there a topic sentence? Is there evidence? If not, what could be added, right? So the description is factual and non-emotional, and it's not evaluative. It's just to say this is here, this is not here. Another strategy that you can use in facilitative feedback is not to use you, because it comes across as an attack. So instead of you, I often say the paragraph or the draft or the sentence, because it's really not about the writer, it's about what is on the paper. And many, many fabulous writers create kind of crappy stuff. And they need to know that, right? It's not about them, it's about what ended up on the page. And what's up here in the writer's head may be different than what makes it down through their fingertips out onto the page. It's also helpful to use, the objectives of an assignment, the rubric criteria, in order to help the writer listen, right? It's not about you, it's about what this assignment is asking for. And also I recommend that feedback be concise, because we don't need to have writers distracted by a bunch of other stuff. So I'm really long-winded as a writer, so it's hard for me to be concise and just say a few things. I try. And especially once I'm working on grammar, I really in some ways can't, because I want you to see what's going on in the grammar. But when I'm working on global issues, I try to reduce the commentary. So hopefully it's manageable. In some circumstances, I'm saying the same thing with every paragraph. And that it tends to look like lots of commentary, but I find if I don't say the same thing with every paragraph, if I say, oh, do the same thing with every paragraph, then the students don't do it. So I have to have the embedded comments in each paragraph to get the stuff done that I want to see happen. Okay, so again, providing facilitative feedback, writers are often describing what's there, right? And they're providing some instructions for what the writer could do to make it better, right? Those are the two things that happen in facilitative feedback. Often the instructions for me have to do with making suggestions and asking questions. And when I ask questions, as I hope you will do with one another, the response to the question would be to generate writing. And the answer to the question belongs in the paragraph, right? So the question isn't like, hey, stupid head, why did you do that? The question is like, I want to know more about how you're thinking about this evidence, right? So can you tell me more about X, right? That's not like that the whole thing you've already done is wrong. That's like, no, literally, I really just do need to know more about X. And would you please put it in your paper? So again, that's facilitative. It's oriented toward revision. I think too, as providers of feedback, it's important to remember that the writer has total power. So as responders, we're providing options, we're providing suggestions. If it's the teacher, sometimes the teacher's saying, thou shalt do this thing, that happens. But often the writer, like the readers may know that something's not working, but they may not know how to fix it because they don't know the writer's intent, which is up in the writer's head. And so the writer needs to be able to take the feedback and say, I'm trying to do this thing and I don't think it's coming across right to the reader. So what do I need to do, right? And then it becomes the writer's task to make some decisions about the comments they're being given. So the readers can tell you what's working, what's not working. They can't make decisions for you. As the writer, you must make those decisions. And it's really unethical in some ways for the teacher to do all the work for the student and then grade the student, right? The teacher's then grading themselves. Usually I want you to see like, oh, move paragraph 3 into between paragraphs 1 and 2 and see what happens. And so I guess I ask you to trust me as your teacher and do what I say so you can see it, knowing that you're not going to lose the previous draft, right? The previous draft is still there. You can always go back to it. But what if you move these paragraphs around? What would happen? Okay, so the Brinkley article that has to do with facilitative feedback that's in the Weaver text is primarily associated with editing conferences. And these may be conferences between teachers and students, and I'm happy to do that with you if you want, or you can get some extra credit for going to the EOU Writing Center and having a tutor give you some feedback. That is, have a sort of conference at a distance with you. And this may also be conferences between students. And in the online environment, I often just do a discussion board, as we'll be doing. And the conference happens in the written original post and then the replies that come back to the writer about the original post. So in a sense, you're having an editing conference with your peer. Okay. Brinkley is really oriented toward conferencing about sentence level errors. We won't be doing that because we're not ready. We're going to be conferencing primarily about global issues. But if you want to raise one pattern of error, you're welcome to do that. And I say pattern of error because remember, we all make plenty of little mistakes that may have nothing to do with what we know or don't know about grammar, right? Just proofreading errors can happen to anybody. Any of us can create typos, right? The thing we might be looking for is routine or repeated kinds of errors, right? So if you see that the student perhaps is struggling with sentence fragments, you might mention it. If you see that the student is struggling with not having enough commas at all because they're terrified of commas, again, you might mention it. Or they're putting apostrophes in the wrong places, again, that's a pattern. So it's really important, I think, to focus on one pattern or two patterns rather than trying to correct every error. Because again, we're never going to get correct fully. We're always going to be struggling to do that. And it's a waste of time to nitpick every little error. But it's really helpful to continue to help writers orient toward the patterns of error that happen in their grammar fingerprints so that they can continue to work on them. I also recommend if you are providing feedback, if you are a teacher and providing feedback, that you use some kind of shared handbook. This class doesn't have a shared handbook. We're kind of relying on internet documentation for errors. So you'll see me probably reach out to online websites, maybe the Purdue OWL or Grammarly or something like that to kind of back up or give you some backup for whatever the thing is I'm talking about. So if it's a rule, it has to do with commas. I may reference a website that can show you lots of models for putting commas in this particular kind of syntax. And I think it's really unfair for me to insist on rules that are only in my head, right? We both need to have a shared source of information about those rules. Otherwise, it's just the teacher imposing their own rules upon the student. And the student, if the student doesn't know them, that no surprise, right? Because we haven't talked about them. So just again, file that away, future teachers or business owners, right? Your business should have a style sheet so that your employees know what kinds of sentences you're expecting. Okay, I also think that just as we might separate global comments from editing comments in responding to peer or student writing, we should also maybe even separate those efforts out in assignments. Like in one assignment, we're going to do global issues, and in a completely different assignment, we'll do proofreading. And that helps students understand that there is a difference, right? That the bigger issues are idea issues, the smaller issues are nitpicky little punctuation issues. Okay, so I think that may be all I want to say at the moment. I just will say that we're headed into, again, let me just pull up discussion board. So what the week 5 feedback assignment asks you to do is to return to the week 4 voice discussion. Right, so here we are in the week 4 voice discussion. I would like you in week 5 to return here and give feedback to one peer, maybe a peer that has not yet received facilitative feedback. And I'd like you to use let's see, Brinkley's approach, which is on page 122, figure 8.1, suggested process for writing conference. In particular, the third and fourth bullets. I would like you to use the third and fourth bullets to provide feedback, facilitative feedback to the student to mirror back what's there and to engage the writer in conversation about next steps, right? What could the writer do next that would make this thing really cool? Turn it into a poem, maybe. Add more orthographic variation, maybe. If the student is talking about having been a native Spanish speaker, maybe bringing Spanish into the piece would really help to show what could make the piece even better than it already is. So that's the goal of this week's work. We're practicing those things in preparation for doing some more formal kinds of feedback with increasingly formal assignments as we move into the second half of the term. I hope that makes sense, and I look forward to reading your feedback.